Morning. Morning. My name is John McHugh. I'm the board director here at the Atlantic Council, not here, but on the Atlantic Council. Also former Secretary of the Army, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning for the first Commander Series event of the year, a conversation with the Army Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley. We're going to talk today, of course, about the future of the Army, about the complex global challenges facing that very important force. Now, I've had the pleasure of knowing General Milley long before he was a general. At Fort Drum, it was in my then congressional district. He was a colonel. And when I looked at him, when I talked to him, you knew you were dealing with somebody special. And certainly following his career when he commanded the 10th and then spent some time with him in the Pentagon when I was secretary and he was the chief, I knew indeed this man stood apart. He's not a perfect man. I can think of one lifelong flaw that he's followed in his entire career. He's not perfect. I mean, he's a Boston Red Sox fan. Other than that, go America. Other than that, he's truly an outstanding American and a great leader for this Army and for this nation. Today's discussion continues the Council's long-standing flagship Commander Series, generously and importantly supported by Saab North America, who's represented here this morning by Vice President Joseph Evans. Joe, sir, thank you for being here. Thank you particularly for Saab's long-standing support of these kinds of events. And since the series began in 2006, top military and defense leaders have used the Council's stage as a platform to shape the military and defense debate regarding the Army's role in the world. Today, we look forward to hearing about how the Army is preparing itself for an ever more challenging security environment. Last fall, the Brent Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council published a report entitled The Future of the Army, Today, Tomorrow, and the Day After Tomorrow, which took an in-depth look at the Army's preparedness for combating present as well as future threats. We're privileged to have actually both of the authors of that report here this morning. I would start with Nora Bensahal, who will be moderating here today. So Nora, thank you for that. And Nora discusses in a report that, as I mentioned, was co-authored by retired Army Lieutenant General Dave Barno, another council fellow who has joined us here this morning as well. Today's Army faces new and multiplying threats amid increasing global commitments. But it remains constrained by an ever-shrinking supply of resources, something we hope that will be at least somewhat ameliorated in the days ahead. And I grappled a bit myself with that tension as Secretary of the Army under President Obama. The challenges of increasing global demand coupled with a shrinking force structure is neither a situation the Army can sustain, nor, I would argue, one it should have to endure. Our ongoing operations in Afghanistan and Iraq have been joined by counter-terror missions against ISIS throughout the Middle East. The revanchist Russia, of course, challenges our allies, particularly in Europe, while North Korea is increasingly provocative. All as China grows more assertive across much of the Asia Pacific. And each of these threats tests the United States' commitment to ensuring the security of our friends, of our allies, and challenges our role as global leader in shaping the security environment. In the midst of this instability, the Army must also grapple with a fundamental shift in the nature of war. Soon our forces may well fight in urban centers and megacities against increasingly diffuse and elusive adversaries. And our conversation this morning will focus on these issues and how the Army can work to maintain its capability and readiness in the face of these growing challenges. Just a couple of housekeeping notes here, if I may. We are, of course, live tweeting this event from the Scowcroft Center account at AC Scowcroft, and we're using the hashtag AC Defense. So, it's my pleasure now to invite Joseph Evans of Saab North America to the podium to formally introduce General Milley. And sir, the floor is yours, and again, thank you for Saab's very important support and membership in the Atlantic Council family.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joe Evans. I'm Executive Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Saab North America. 2017 marks 80 years since Saab was founded. Throughout that time, we've remained at the forefront of technology and innovation, designing and manufacturing products that enhance national defense and increase public safety and security. We began as a small Swedish aircraft manufacturer and have grown to become a global power of defense and security solutions across all domains. Here in the United States, we've been active for more than 40 years, supplying the U.S. government and industry with our products and technologies. We've also been actively promoting not only a close and robust U.S.-Swedish relationship, but strong relationships between the United States, Canada, and Europe. As a global defense and security company, responsibility and commitment to people and society are fundamental to Saab. We are devoted to promoting peace and safety for all by further strengthening our transatlantic ties. Today's global security situation makes this effort more important than ever. That is why Saab support of the Atlantic Council and our sponsorship of the Commander Series, now in its 8th year, are so valuable and important to us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor and pleasure to introduce our special guest, General Mark A. Milley. General Milley currently serves as the 39th Chief of Staff of the United States Army, a position he assumed on 14 August 2015. He previously served as the 21st Commander of the U.S. Forces Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Raised in Winchester, Massachusetts, General Milley graduated and received his commission from Princeton University in 1980. Since then, he has held numerous command and staff positions across 8 divisions and with U.S. Special Forces. General Milley commanded the 1st Battalion, 506th Infantry, 2nd Infantry Division, and the 2nd Brigade of the 10th Mountain Division. He went on to serve as Deputy Commanding General for the 101st Airborne Division, Commanding General of the 10th Mountain Division, and Commanding General of 3 Corps and Fort Hood. In his numerous deployments, he has served as Deputy Commanding General for Operations for Regional Command East, Deputy Commanding General of U.S. Forces, Afghanistan, and as Commanding General, International Security Assistance Force, Joint Command. General Milley's staff assignments at the Pentagon include Deputy Director for Regional Operations for the Joint Staff's current Operations Directorate and as Military Assistant to the Secretary of Defense. General Milley holds master's degrees from Columbia University and the U.S. Naval War College and is a graduate of the MIT Seminar 21 National Security Studies program. These are just a few of the highlights from General Milley's long career and distinguished service to the United States. General, we are very grateful that you could join us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General Mark A. Milley to the stage.
Use the watch here for us to stay on time.
Thank you very much for those introductions, and thank all of you for coming to this conversation today. It's a pleasure to look out at a packed room for this event. I want to start by the big picture question. You know, we live in a time of really exponential change, and Secretary McHugh's comments started alluding to that, where things are progressing rapidly in almost every dimension, politically, economically, socially, and particularly technologically. You've spoken a number of times about how the nature of war will not change. It will still be based on the factors of fear, honor, and interest, and change and uncertainty. Those things will always be a part of warfare. I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you think the character of war is going to change, the things that do change based on the environment. And in particularly, how, in your thinking, would you describe the 3 most important aspects of how that character of war is going to change and what that means for the Army in the future?
Thanks, Norm. There's been a long-standing war between New York and Boston. Probably the biggest change in that character of war is I suspect strongly at the end of this year, the Red Sox will end up on top. And to Secretary McHugh's chagrin, the Yankees probably won't. So we need 3 at halftime in football, so we'll do it again. So the first things first, that's right. Get that out of the way. The former secretary is one of them. I'm on my 6th. So we'll talk about the future. I gave a talk almost, I guess, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months ago, something like that, at AUSA, and I talked about that topic. I believe, and this is just my opinion, but it's I think an informed opinion based on a significant amount of study that the Army's done and that I've done over years, but most recently put a lot of effort in the last couple of years on trying to figure out what the future conditions look like. Michael Howard said, British historian, he said one time that the challenge for militaries is not to get it right, but get it less wrong than your enemy. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't propose that we, the Army, or anyone really, has any clairvoyant view exactly of the future. You're not going to get that correct. But we want to get it less wrong than anyone that we may fight in the future. And the future inherently, by definition, is unknown and unknowable. But I think through some rigorous study, you can identify some broad outlines and you can make some pretty informed and educated decisions on what your doctrine, organization, equipment, stuff looks like. So some things I think that are going to impact, I have no doubt that will impact in the future. Obviously technology. So I think we're at the intersection of a variety of technologies that are happening in time and space all about the same time, that are going to have a fundamental change or result in a fundamental change to character war. And I use the word character war very explicitly. The nature of war, Clausewitz tells us, nature of war is, all about will, the triangle of war, friction, fog, all those things. That's the nature. That's probably not going to change. It's more or less immutable. But the character of war does change. It changes where you fight, how you fight, the ways in which you fight, equipment that you fight with, the doctrine, the organization. That changes frequently. Fundamental changes to the character of war only happen infrequently. And think, for example, past changes like going from a smoothbore musket to a rifled musket and what that meant. That meant a lot in that the increases the risk of death, lethality of the battlefield, significantly increased at range when you went from a musket, smoothbore musket, to a rifle. Or think, probably the most consequential was the introduction of the radio in combination with the airplane, in combination with mechanization, wheeled and tracked vehicles, which was introduced sort of around World War I and in between World War I and World II. That had enormous impact on how armies fought and the ways in which they fought. So I think that there's an intersection of technologies that are happening today, right this minute, and probably have been happening for a decade or more. But now they're becoming very clearly visible. What are those technologies? First, it's been out there for quite a while, precision-guided munitions. They were introduced really at the end of the Vietnam War. For a long time, the United States dominated precision-guided munitions. Now, precision-guided munitions have proliferated throughout the world. And then you have a ubiquitous nature of information technology, specifically, for example, iPhones. And today, almost anywhere on the Earth's surface, not everywhere, but almost anywhere, you have access to information technologies and high-quality imagery and communications, and you can get real-time data on the location of people, equipment, formations, etc. I would argue that we're at a point, again, there'll always be fog and friction, but we're at a point where almost anything militarily can be seen, especially large formations. So when you combine the ability to see, the ubiquitous nature of information technologies that are out there, with precision-guided munitions, that's going to, like the smoothbore to the rifle, that's going to rapidly and radically increase lethality on a battlefield to armies. Some other technologies that are out there that I think are converging very quickly, robotics is coming on very, very fast. We already see the introduction of robots or robotic-type systems in the air domain, in the maritime domain. We use them in a limited way in ground domain. But I do think that over the next, say, 10 years or so, you're going to see the rapid introduction of robotic systems in ground warfare, and it won't be limited to just maritime and air. And that'll have impacts. There's other things like 3D printing. There's a lot of work being done in fuels. There's a lot of work being done in kinetics. We've been using gunpowder for, I guess, 5 centuries or so. There's things being done in electromagnetic systems and laser systems. There's a whole wide variety of technologies out there that are coming together in time and space. There's a bunch of societal things that are happening. One is demographics. Political science, social sciences are not hard scientists, are not hard sciences. They're not as predictive in nature as, say, physics. But there are some things out there, specifically in demographics, that we can, with a high degree of certainty, say are happening. So one thing that's been happening for a century, a little bit more than a century, is the dense urbanization, or the increasing urbanization of the world's population. So right now, today, you got perhaps about 6 billion people in the world. By 2050, the demographers tell us that it's going to be about 8 billion people. Of those 8 billion people, somewhere in the 90 percentile, maybe 85%, something like that, are going to live in highly dense, complex urban areas. Right now, you've got maybe 10, 15 megacities defined as cities over 10 million people. By 2050, you'll probably have 50 or plus megacities. Think cities like Seoul, Tokyo, Mexico City. There's going to be about 50 of those type cities throughout the world. And then a lot of other cities that are less than 10 million, 5 million, 2 million, 3 million. So dense urbanization, highly complex, dense urbanization. We can say that the where you fight, I think, my opinion, my conclusion is that it is highly probable that the military forces, armed conflict, will occur in highly dense, urban, complex terrain, physical terrain. That's a big, huge implication for armies, and specifically the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army has been optimized to fight in rural terrain, to fight in the plains of Northern Europe, North America, the deserts of the Middle East, with a lot of implications to how we organize and buy equipment, etc. If you now take that and you say you have to optimize for urban warfare, there's a huge amount of implications. So a tank's barrel, just as an example, a tank's barrel can elevate to a certain degree. In an urban area, it might have to elevate at almost a 90-degree angle. That has huge implications. UAVs and the wingspans, command and control and radio systems. Can you communicate in highly dense urban areas with reinforced concrete? Can you do underground systems in highly dense urban areas? Organizations, urban areas have significant impact on the organizational structure, and they tend to compartment forces. Casualty evacuation, urban battles are much more highly casualty producing than non-urban battles. And the list goes on and on and on. There's about maybe 100, 150 significant implications to that fact of urbanization and the likelihood that armed conflict is going to be more in urban areas than not. That is not to say that it'll never happen in a rural area. We've always had niche capabilities, suboptimal capabilities, to fight in jungles, to fight in mountains, to fight in urban areas. But we optimized for non-urban areas. And now I think, as we go forward, for the U.S. Army, we're probably going to have to shift gears significantly over the coming decade or so to optimize the Army, or land forces, I would argue the Marines as well, to be able to operate successfully in combat operations in highly dense, complex urban areas. And there's tons of implications to that. So those are just two things, just some technological changes, for example, and a sociological change, and they have a lot of implications. There's a lot more that would take a lot longer than this interview is going to do, but those are just some insights that we're working on, and they will see themselves manifest in acquisition programs, training, doctrine, organizations, et cetera, in the coming years.
Right, obviously there's a huge number of implications there. I want to focus though on the people implications and what that means for soldiers, because the Army is really about people, always has been and always will.
Right.
You've talked in the past a bit about the difficult battlefield conditions. In October you said, in your characteristically blunt manner, that soldiers, quote, are going to be needing to, quote, learning to be comfortable with being seriously miserable every single minute of every single day will have to become a way of life for an Army on the battlefield that I see coming. So obviously that has to do with battlefield conditions. How do you prepare soldiers for adapting to that, or that future environment, both in terms of the misery of what the future battlefield may be like, but in particular mentally for leadership in those kinds of environments? How
Well,
do you-
we've got to, generals often get accused of fighting the last war all the time. The last war is really kind of the war we're in, so to speak, since 2001, which is primarily, with the exception of 2003 invasion of Iraq, it's primarily been a counterinsurgency, counterterrorist fight. And we have had a wide variety of conditions that we have accustomed ourselves to. There's an entire generation of officers now that think their only experience in combat is to fight from victory base or bomber base or fixed sites where you have access to a variety of comfort items, if you will, and Pizza Huts and Burger Kings and stuff like that. You have showers and you have hooches that you can go to and sleep in and so on and so forth. So we've got accustomed to that as an institution. We've also got accustomed on a substantive military side of that of having control of the air, for example, and Army forces. In fact, Army forces, ground forces, but specifically Army forces, having come under fixed-wing enemy air attack since the beaches of Normandy. So it's been 7 decades since we've ever experienced an attack from enemy fixed-wing air. The air waves, the electromagnetic spectrum, is more or less permissive for the last 16, 17 years of combat against Al-Qaeda and Taliban and ISIS and these groups. So there's a wide variety of conditions that our institution has been conditioned to do. Artillery has been firing in 1 and 2 tube missions for the most part over 17 years. Attack helicopters are flying 1 and 2 gun missions for the last 17 years, for the most part, with few exceptions. So that's conditioned the organization and the leaders and the people in it. And everyone is a victim of their own past experience, sort of thing. And we have to be careful that we don't assume that future combat is the past, the recent past. And we've got to be willing and capable to adapt. It's possible, and I think likely, that we will continue to fight for various terrorist organizations. So we need to maintain and sustain those capabilities, those tactics, techniques, and procedures. We need to do that, continue to do that. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So we want to be able to continue to do that over the next X amount of years or decades. But at the same time, we have got to recondition ourselves to a different type of war. The war we've been fighting against terrorists is a single typology of war. There are many other types of war. And the one that is perhaps the most difficult and challenging and very real in possibility is a larger war against a near-peer or a much more capable state adversary, a state-on-state conflict, in very rugged, urban, complex terrain. In that environment, especially with the lethality and the ability to see and precision munitions, the likelihood of massing forces on a base for any length of time certainly means you're going to be dead, and that's, you're going to get killed. If you're stationary, you'll die. Your logistics lines, your lines of communications are going to come under intense stress. It is unlikely that you're going to have the conditions under which we've operated. Your electromagnetic spectrum is going to be at least degraded, if not completely disrupted. Your ability to have immunity from enemy air is unlikely to be there. And yet, you're still going to have to fight, and you still have to win. And I would argue that those conditions are intense and very, very Spartan. And we have got to condition ourselves to operate, untether ourselves from this umbilical cord of logistics and supply that American forces have enjoyed for a very lengthy period of time. And we've got to be able to fight in smaller groups. Being surrounded would be a norm. Be able to fight and survive in environments that are going to be highly lethal. You're going to have to move constantly, maybe every 2, 3, 4 hours just to survive. You're probably going to get water and ammunition, maybe some medical. Some of your resupplies are going to have to be produced on site by yourself with 3D printing sort of thing. It's going to be a very tough, rigorous environment, and no one should have any illusions about that. It'll be brutal, it'll be hard, it'll be tough, and we have to condition our forces to that and expect that. And anything beyond that is luxury. But don't go into this thinking it's gonna be any other than that. My dad hit the beach in Iwo Jima in 19 February 1945. 7,000 Marines were killed in 19 days on that island, 34,000 wounded, 22,000 Japanese killed on that island, with 109 prisoners taken. That was unbelievably brutal. We have to condition ourselves for the rigors and the violence of intense combat, if it comes. I'm not being predictive, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying we have to man, train, equip, organize our army and other forces to be able to deal with that type of warfare. If we don't, we're placing young men and women at high risk if we don't train and get them ready for that type of war. I'm not predicting that that type of war is going to happen, but it could, and our job is preparedness.
So the type of battlefield you just described will require a lot of resilience among soldiers,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
But it's also going to require a lot of decentralization and a lot of initiative,
Sure.
particularly at the more junior levels.
That's right.
And there's a tension in the Army culture, frankly, between the culture of the Army when it's operating on missions, where it's very that decentralization, mission command, you see a lot of that play out. But when you're back at home, back in garrison,
Right.
there's a culture, another part of the Army culture, which is very risk averse, very focused on bureaucratic compliance. In preparation for this event, I looked up the number of Army regulations. There are currently 537. I will add that is 8 more than last time I checked 3 months ago. And soldiers are...
Thank you for that, Norm.
And soldiers are being put in a position where they literally cannot meet the number of requirements. So the Army number from a couple of years ago was that a company commander has 451 required training days in a 365-day year because of all of these requirements. So how are you trying to address that fundamental disconnect where we know in operations we're going to need our junior folks to be making life and death decisions, but we're even, for our junior folks and even some of the more senior people, we have this culture of compliance that is really reducing the initiative that we absolutely rely on them to have for effective combat operations.
Right, and there's a balance in there that you have to achieve. My own assessment is that the pendulum has swung towards risk aversion, over centralization, over time. Again, this isn't some recent phenomenon over the last couple of years or something like that. This has been over time. And the large bureaucracies tend to be very conservative and risk averse, and they are compliance oriented. And there's a reason for that. There are reasons bureaucracies exist. There are reasons rules are made and regulations are made. And okay, that's fine, and we need to keep that in perspective. On the other hand, I think that the pendulum's swung too far. I think we're over-centralized, overly bureaucratic, and overly risk averse, which is the opposite of what we're going to need in any type of warfare, but in particular in the warfare I envision. We are going to have to empower, decentralize leadership to make decisions and achieve battlefield effects in a widely dispersed environment where subordinate leaders, junior leaders, are not going to be able to, they may not be able to communicate to their higher headquarters, even if they wanted to. So we have to, again, shift gears, and you're not going to take some sort of magic pill at the time of combat to change a person's culture, or to change an organization's culture and their method of operation, and magically go from very centralized systems to decentralized systems. That's not going to just happen by magic dust at the time of combat. You have to train to it, you have to prepare for it, and you have to live it and do it every day. Now, we have a doctrine that does exactly what I'm saying. It's called mission command. And it's not a new doctrine. This is an old concept that goes back to the ancient Greeks. It was practiced by a lot of folks. Napoleon, the Germans talked about it, the British talked about it, Americans talked about it. And so it's not something new. Mission command is our current moniker for it. But all it says is that to a subordinate, you, the higher, should tell that person what the purpose, tell the person why, the purpose of what they're doing. That's important. The subordinates understand the why, the purpose. And then essentially tell them the task, the what. I want you to seize the island of Iwo Jima for the purpose of advancing an air base. Is we micromanage and overly specify everything the subordinate has to do all the time in regulations and alert messages and rules. And this isn't unique to the Army. It's true in other services. It's true in society. Look at the laws and rules out of Congress. That is not an effective way. It might be an effective way to do certain things. It is not an effective way to fight. It's not an effective way to conduct combat operations. You will lose battles and wars if you approach warfare like that. So we have to practice what we preach. We preach mission command, but we don't necessarily practice it on a day-to-day basis in everything we do. And we need to do that. We as an Army, as an institution, it starts with me and the Secretary of the Army. It goes down through our General Officer Corps. We need to practice it. Inherent in that are some characteristics. One is trust. We must trust our subordinates, right? So you give them tasks, you give them the purpose, and then you trust them to execute and achieve your intent, your desired outcome, the purpose. If they fail, you fire them. And that's what people don't like to do. They don't like holding people accountable. So here's what happens in large organizations. If the subordinate fails, we say, oh, Mark, you tried really hard, you did a really good job. And what we do is we take the task now and put it in our own inbox. And we overly centralize. Instead of saying, you failed to take that island of Iwo Jima, you're out. You over there, you're in for the next island. That's how you have to do it in warfare. We give them a task, give them a purpose, you got to resource the guy. Give them a task, give them a purpose, resource them. And if they achieve it, great, hang a medal, make them hero of the American Republic and all the rest of it. But if they fail, they're out. It's not a very complicated concept. And in warfare, that's how you have to operate. So if we're going to have to operate like that in warfare, we have to train as we're going to fight. We have to live and operate like that on a day-to-day basis. Even on daily administrative tasks you have to do in a unit area, we have to live with that. We have to inculcate that into our very being every single day within the Army. And in some places you see it in spades, in others you don't. What my challenge is, I have to make sure that the entire force has to do it. The other part, so trust is a big deal. The other part is the concept of disobedience. We should encourage, this is a really controversial concept, right? Because with the military, so you're supposed to go obey your orders. That's kind of discipline. That's fundamental to being in the military. That's true. We want to keep doing that. But a subordinate needs to understand that they have the freedom and they're empowered to disobey a specific order, a specified task in order to accomplish the purpose. Now, it takes a lot of judgment, and the subordinate better understand what he's doing when he's doing it. It can't be just willy-nilly disobedience. This has got to be disciplined disobedience to achieve the higher purpose. If you do that, and there's many, many examples of that throughout military history, if you do that, then you're the guy going to get the pat on the back. If you knowingly walk over the abyss because you're following this task and this task and this task, but you don't achieve the purpose, you're going to get fired. So disciplined disobedience also has to be inculcated. And that disobedience, when done, must be done with trust, integrity, and you must be morally and ethically correct. You can't disobey, achieve the purpose, and violate common norms of American society. You can't go out and slaughter and murder in order to achieve the purpose of seizing Objective X. That's a no-go, you're going to prison. So that would be stupid disobedience. So there's smart disobedience, disciplined disobedience, in accordance with ethical and moral rules to achieve a higher tactical or operational strategic purpose. And then there's stupid chip on my shoulder disobedience. You're going to get hammered for that. So there's two different types there, and I'm asking the force to understand the first and try to inculcate that in our force. And I want younger officers, if they're approaching a hill, and I told them, seize Hill 101. And I said, the purpose is to destroy the enemy. And the young officer comes up there and sees Hill 101, and the enemy's over on Hill 102. What does he do? Does he do what I told him to do, seize Hill 101? Or does he achieve the purpose, destroy the enemy on Hill 102? And the answer is, he goes to Hill 102. And he shouldn't have to call back and say, hey boss, Mother Man, can I go over to 102? He shouldn't have to do that. No, they should be empowered and feel that they have freedom of maneuver to achieve the purpose within the bounds of ethical norms of America.
How do you try to inculcate that as a chief of staff? I mean, obviously the Army is a big bureaucracy, and it has to be a big bureaucracy.
Right.
So how do you try to lead the organization towards those objectives you just laid out?
talk about it, educate, set an example, empower subordinates to do that, my own, the general subordinates. But also, we have to train it in, our training exercises. But I also encourage people to live it every day. So, for example, what I give you is a tactical example. But another example, let's just say this conference, okay? What is the intent of the conference? I have people that help me come here to this conference. What's the intent? What's the desired outcome? What's the purpose? Get me there, get me on time, get me in the right uniform, that kind of thing. But I just tell them, okay, here's the task, conference, and they know the rest of it, and I trust them to do that. And remarkably, I was delivered on time, like a FedEx package, more or less in the right uniform. And I kind of have an idea of what I was going to say without any preparation, that kind of thing. So it's every day, whether it's coming to a conference, it's doing a hail and farewell, whether it's a training event, an Office of Professional Development or an NCO Professional Development class, whether it's going to a training range, whether it's going on an overseas exercise, or whether it's going to combat operations. You have to live it, breathe it, taste it, and do it all the time. And if you over-supervise and micromanage everything, it won't work. It just won't work. It might work in peace. It will not work in combat. And oh, by the way, I got to get rid of all these regulations that Secretary McHugh put in place. I couldn't resist.
I want to ask you one last question before we open it up to audience Q&A. And that has to do with the widening and unfortunately growing gap between the U.S. military and the people that it serves in American society. As you well know, our audience may not know, fewer than 1% of Americans serve in the military today, and increasingly it's the same 1%. One of the biggest likelihood of your joining the military is having a family member, particularly a parent who serves. So, given that, and given that most people in the Army, in the military, tend to live on big bases that in a lot of ways are the world's most exclusive gated communities, as has been said, there's even less interaction with the American people on a day-to-day basis, in terms of medical care, child care, going to the grocery store, going to the movies, just daily life.
Right.
How do you prevent the Army from being completely walled off from the society that it serves, particularly as so much of the force is coming home now, is based in the United States? What do you need to do to ensure that the Army reflects the diversity of the whole nation, not just in terms of race and ethnicity and gender, but also politically and demographically, and the urban-rural split in this country, to ensure that those who serve don't become a separate warrior caste?
Yeah, I think there's several things, I think, and thanks for that question. I do think that the growing civil-military disconnect is possible. One former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when I was a brigadier, as he was leaving office, he actually said that was his biggest concern. It wasn't Russia, China, North Korea, whatever. It was the growing civil-military divide, which I thought was interesting. I think there is. I think it's true because we have a professional military, a subculture, if you will, and it is on mega bases or small bases. Actually, only about a third of the military lives on the base, but on the base surrounding communities. And the connective tissue to the broader society of America may not be there. Most Americans get their view of the military from the movies, from the news, from hearsay, from watching TV or whatever, rather than personal understanding or connection with soldiers. I might add that in some ways people say, only 1% of America wears a uniform and all that. That actually is the norm in American history. There's only been a couple of times in American history when we have had a large number of people, certainly the American Civil War, and then World War II. World I, there were a lot of people in the military, but relative to the size of the population, it wasn't as big as you might think, even though we're in the 100th anniversary of World War I. Spanish-American War, 1812, even the Revolution, those are relatively small comparative to the whole. And if you add up the years of all those, quote, big wars, relative to 240 plus years of American history, that's probably about a decade or two of larger scale militaries. And then you get post-World War II. So post-World War II, we have a large standing military because of the demands of the Cold War. In some ways, out of 2.5 centuries, the idea that you have a large percentage of the population in the military is in some ways an aberration rather than a norm. But we've gotten conditioned to that over time, especially from our experience out of World War II and the Korea, Vietnam era and the draft and all that. We have a professional military. It's an all-volunteer military. It's highly capable, highly competent. It's a very good military. But having said that, I do agree with you. There is a potential for a growing gap and a misunderstanding. I believe, Mark Milley believes, the burden's on us, the guys in uniform, to make sure that we reach out beyond just the news and TV, that we reach out to communities and we let the people know who we are and what we do and what we're about. I like to use the term, we're the people's army, and we should never forget that. We are not some sort of super warrior class. We are of the people, by the people, and for the people sort of thing, the document we all swore allegiance to. So we are the people's army, or the people's Navy, the people's Air Force, the people's Marines. We're the people's army, and we should never forget that. And our fundamental purpose, going back to mission command, our fundamental purpose is to protect the people. And we do that by supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. So the people, the connection of the people to its military, the people to the people's army, is fundamental, in my view, to the health of the republic and the health of the democracy. We don't want and should not accept this divide, this split, and we should do much to bridge that. So what are we doing to bridge that in the Army? First of all, we have an organizational advantage to help bridge that. It's called the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve. They're really critical because they're in all states, they're in the communities, and they are, in some ways, in many locations of America, the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve are, in fact, the face of the Army to the local community. That's an important function. But in addition to that, for the regular Army, at forts like Fort Bragg or Fort Hood, these large bases, there's a lot of community engagement done, and I encourage commanders to get beyond the local community. So if you're at Fort Hood, don't just engage with the surrounding communities like Killeen, Texas. Engage with all of Texas. Engage with Oklahoma too, and so on and so forth. And there's no reason why you can't. There's no reason why company commanders and first sergeants and battalion commanders can't go out and visit high schools or colleges or marching parades or go to police stations or go visit fire departments or go to hospitals. Be seen. You know, we absorb an enormous amount of money from the American taxpayer. The American people deserve to see what they're getting for their money, and they ought to get to know their military. And I believe the burden of exposing ourselves is on us, and the burden of showing the military and what we do is on us. We need to do that. Open up our camps, bring students and people in to show the life and the day of a soldier. There's all kinds of techniques out there to do that. But we have got to collectively understand that burden's on us. It's not on the American people. We shouldn't run around saying, oh, too bad you couldn't join the 1% or something like that. We have to be careful about developing a certain arrogance about being in the military, that somehow we are distinct and above the society which we protect. That's a very, very dangerous thing for militaries to ever do, culturally and psychologically. I've seen that in other countries, where they think they're so elite they're above, and all of a sudden they become a rule. That's ungood, not good. We're the people's army, we protect the people, we're from the people, of the people, by the people, and we need that connective tissue all the time, every day, and it's done in small baby steps, every single day, all over America. And we have to do that, and if we don't, I think it will be dangerous for the health of the republic over time.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions. We have time for just a couple. Please, when I call on you, identify yourself and your affiliation. There are microphones that will come to you from around the room. Yes, in fact.
Sydney, I can always count on you to be the first one.
I was worried because I didn't crawl all the way to the front this time, but I'm glad.
You look good too, you got a good haircut, thank you. When are you coming in my arm? Close that 1% gap, when are you coming in? Sydney went to Harvard, he's a Red Sox Nation fan. Go ahead, Sydney.
I went to Harvard, we didn't have sports teams that really did much. But I want to ask the importance of initiative on the one hand and the accountability on the other. There's a a dark side of that. When you hear people in the corporate world, in Silicon Valley and the acquisition world, talk about encouraging initiative. They also talk about, that requires some freedom to fail. That especially junior people need to be able to make mistakes, pick themselves up, dust themselves off.
Right.
Now, you probably don't want them conducting the charge of the light brigade and then dusting themselves off and going on. But there has to be a way to convey to commanders,
Right.
Here are permissible, teachable moment failures. These are failures that are okay, and these are failures where, no, that's the out and you're
We're
coming.
short on time, so I'm gonna ask.
That's right. No, I got your question, Cindy. So, that's right. We want to encourage the freedom to fail, except it depends on the failure. Okay, so if you have a failure in the Battle of the Bulge at Normandy, hey, I'm sorry. This is a tough business. It's lives at stake. It's national security priorities. And dude, you join the United States military. Winning matters. Victory matters. It matters that you plant the flag of Mount Suribachi and you take Iwo Jima. But if you fail in lesser important things, that's different. There are teachable moments, and it's up to the senior folks to clearly understand and have judgment. And then there are other things. We don't want a zero defects organization. I don't believe we have one, by the way. But there are some things which are zero defects. There are some things of morality, personal conduct, that I'm sorry. Life is hard, and it's way harder when you're stupid. So if you do stupid, immoral, illegal, unethical things, you're gone. There is no second chance. I'm sorry, that's the way it works. And if it's a thing of significant, major, strategic, national importance, and you failed to win a battle or whatever, then you should, and rightfully so, be held accountable. There are, however, teachable moments, and it's up to the senior leaders to identify those and use them on a day-to-day basis. So, go ahead, yes. I'm sorry, you're
That's okay.
moderated now. I'm a peasant here. Yes.
Sherry Goodman.
Sherry,
Great. Sherry Goodman, gentlemen, Board Director here at the Atlantic Council. I appreciate your comment about unleashing the Army from its logistics supply. And as you well know, Secretary Mattis has called on the military to be unleashed from the tether of fuel. So can you talk a little bit about how you're innovating in the Army to unleash the force from the logistics tail of fuel and water that has been difficult in current fights, and the opportunities for new technologies in those arenas? And second, in the urban areas, the urban megacities are also the ones most affected by climate change and the disaster alley in the Pacific, with rising sea levels and extreme weather events, which also put stress on the force. How is the Army today going to prepare to fight in higher temperatures, higher sea levels, more extreme weather, and wildfire events?
Okay, this is a loaded question, a lot of questions in there. So, on the first one about unleashing from the logistics tail, not particularly a novel concept. Grant did it at Vicksburg, and one of our most famous campaigns, unleashed himself from his basic supplies, and won a great operational victory that had strategic effect. And the fact of the matter is, like I said, I don't think we're going to have the luxury of having this massive mountain of logistics behind us in future higher and higher intensity combat, in my opinion. But two things you mentioned, fuel and water. The fact of the matter is that we still rely on carbon-based fuels. All of society does, and the military does as well. So for now and into the immediate future, that's a fact, and we have to deal with it. Otherwise, the tanks are going to stop, or the trucks are going to stop, or the planes aren't going to fly. So carbon-based fuels are here today, and it is unlikely in terms of scale and scope that we will transform the United States military to something other than that in the near future, defined as inside of 10 years. There are possibilities in alternative systems and alternative fuels. Elon Musk, with his Tesla car, right, he just became, I think, #1 in the United States, beat out Ford in General Motors, and he's #2 only in Toyota. And he doesn't use fuel, he's using some sort of electric engine. So it is possible to have alternative methods of powering vehicles, either land vehicles, air vehicles, or seagoing vessels. Nuclear fuels are used in some naval vessels. The widespread use of it, the scope, that's going to be sometime in the future. But we are doing a lot of research on that, and there's a lot of possibilities out there. They're not ready for prime time at the size, scale, and scope of the United States Army yet. Water, different issue. I believe that units are going to have to, for example, water purification, instead of relying on some big centralized base, we're going to have distributed purification capabilities within smaller units so that they have to supply themselves water. Again, not a novel concept. That's been done for centuries by different armies throughout the world. I'm going to pause on the second part because there's a lot in that second part about rising sea levels in cities, how we're going to fight in hot temperatures. I would argue that we will adapt. I think the temperatures are really hot, but I don't know in my lifetime, your lifetime, or in my children's lifetime that those temperatures are going to get much hotter than LED airbase or Iraq. We have fought, and we will continue to fight in weather extremes. Really cold weather, really hot weather. We've been able to do that for a long time. I believe that we will continue to be able to do that. There are some unique aspects in certain conditions that we'll have to adapt to once we recognize those conditions. It is an issue, it is a problem, we are looking at it, but I don't see any fundamental, transformative level changes in the coming 5, 10 years that would cause me to make a hard left or a hard right, as opposed to some of the things I mentioned up front. Precision guided missions, information technologies, urbanization, those are going to cause some fundamental shifts left or right.
One last question, since he called on you.
Lori Milroy, Kurdistan 24. Sir, you talk about the future of wars being in these dense urban environments. Now in Mosul, there is fighting in a dense urban environment. Is the U.S. Army taking lessons
Yes.
from the Mosul fighting?
Absolutely. Yeah, every day, and we have professional collectors doing all that, and we're watching it closely. So, in World War I, there were a variety of weapon systems that were introduced and technologies: barbed wire, machine guns, proximate fuse, and artillery, and stuff like that, which created a very lethal battlefield. All of those systems and all of that environment was known to those who cared to look. From 1860s, American Civil War, up through the start of World War I. They were all known out there. And the Russian-Japanese War, the Boer War, Franco-Prussian War, American Civil War, many other conflicts, showed what all those technologies could do. But there were people at the time, like me, general officers, civilian leaders of the various militaries, who did not connect those dots. And then they walked over the abyss in 1914, and there was mass slaughter. Everyone thought the war would be short. Everyone thought it would be a great war maneuver, it'd be over in 6 weeks. They had no earthly idea, with the exception of very few, of what they were walking into and the implications of those technologies. Right today, you're seeing the previews, you're seeing the movie trailers of future conflict, in my opinion, in Mosul, in Fallujah, in Aleppo. Pick your urban area that's over there. But just remember that Mosul is not even a neighborhood in Seoul. So the scale and scope, you're seeing miniature versions of what might come. The Russo-Japanese War wasn't even a small core level section of the front of World War I. So you're seeing previews and movie trailers, and it's incumbent upon me, the Department of Defense, and other senior leaders to make sure that we are capturing the lessons of what we see happening out there today in the world, and not fight the last war, but capture the salient lessons that are out there in order to look into the future and develop the doctrine, the organization, the weapons. And we're doing that on a very systematic basis, and we do that very, very rigorously. And thanks for the question, but we are taking a look at that.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm sure we could keep this conversation going for another hour. There's a lot of interest, obviously, in the room. But I want to thank you very much for being here and for your open, honest answers to a wide-ranging questions on a very important subject. I'm sure the conversation will continue at the Attorney Council and beyond. Please join me in thanking you.
Let me just close with two things real quick, you're not expecting it, but I want to put a little plug in here for Nora and Dave Barno. Very great observers of current events and conflict and so on. So they wrote a couple of really good recent articles that are worth taking a look at in a variety of publications. One of them is War on the Rocks. But they cover many of the things that I'm talking about too. So, and we didn't coordinate actually, but a couple of good pieces out there. And the last thing I would just leave you with is we are in combat right now today against terrorist nation, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in harm's way today, right now, right this minute. And I just ask that everybody keep them in your thoughts and prayers, and keep reminding yourself of the freedoms that we enjoy. They're not free. They come at a cost, and they come at a cost in blood and treasure, mostly in blood. And there's young men and women out there in the front lines of freedom right now. So I ask you to just keep them in your prayers.